The Amazon rainforest and its people have become part of a wider political battle.
The Pulitzer Center Climate Conference is an incredible event, an incredible opportunity for all of the journalists here and people who are not journalists.
The Pulitzer Center gave me the courage and also the credibility to pursue this story.
But whether justice is ultimately served to the hundreds of victims and their families will depend on the course of the war in Ukraine, which is far from over.
The 1619 project, these resources were just perfect for my students.
We are talking about mobilizing, we are talking about engaging, we are talking about calling people to action.
Temperatures can exceed 50 degrees Celsius with almost staggering humidity.
And the NewsHour's coverage is supported in partnership with the Pulitzer Center.
In partnership with the Pulitzer Center.
In partnership with the Pulitzer Center.
Uno, dos, tres. Hola, buenas noches a todas y todos. Eu me chamo Tatiana Dias, vou falar um pouquinho em portunhol. Eu sou periodista em Brasil. Atualmente sou editora em The Intercept Brasil e fellow da AI Accountability Network do Pulitzer Center. É a primeira vez que participo do Festival Gabo e é imenso honor estar aqui. Me comove muito a ideia de um festival centrado em Latinoamérica que celebra o poder de contar histórias. E hoje estou aqui com uma periodista que domina o superpoder de contar histórias sobre inteligência artificial. Ler e escuchar Karen Hao é como quitar-se uma venda de los ojos. Em um momento em que todo mundo habla de IA, quando oímos tanto que essas tecnologias vão a matar ou salvar o periodismo, destruir al hombre o curar al cáncer, es crucial mantener los dos pies en el suelo. Y comprender de forma pragmática realmente de qué está hecha la IA. Y cómo nosotros, como periodistas, podemos no solo hacer un mejor uso de la IA, de esas tecnologías, sino también investigarlas y mostrar cuáles son sus impactos reales en la sociedad. Karen Hao es ingeniera mecánica, estudou em MIT. Hoje é periodista e colaboradora de The Atlantic. É a co-criadora da iniciativa AI Spotlight Series, coordenada por el Pulitzer Center, que está formando a cientos de periodistas para que compreendam e cubram melhor os temas relacionados com a inteligência artificial. Ayer tivemos um taller fantástico, uma autêntica classe magistral, e hoje vamos falar um pouco do que lo tratamos ali. E eu vou começar com essa conversação com uma pergunta sencilla, pero muito reveladora. How do you define artificial intelligence, and what exactly are we talking about?
Thank you so much, Tatiana, and thank you all so much for being here, especially after a very exciting game, and right before another very exciting game. So thank you all. So to start with this question of what is artificial intelligence, it's a really great question now that AI is being talked about all over the world. I think, first of all, AI is a group of digital technologies that are all tied together based on the fact that they are designed to recreate human capabilities. And one of the challenges today in understanding AI is that the entire world was introduced to AI through a very specific technology, which is ChatGPT. And so I think there's a common misconception that AI is just one type of technology. It's chatbots or generative AI. But actually, AI is sort of like the word transportation. Like you can have a bike or a car or a plane or a rocket, and it's all transportation. But obviously, these different categories of things are, they work fundamentally differently. And AI is sort of a similar thing where all of these technologies are meant to kind of recreate different aspects of human capabilities. Maybe it's trying to recreate how we see, it's trying to recreate how we listen, how we talk. But there are many varieties, many flavors of AI, some of which have actually been around for a very, very long time, and others which we now see today emerging under the category of generative AI and other technologies like ChatGPT.
Yesterday at the workshop, you showed us how AI concepts have been there for like 4 decades. And what has happened since then in recent years that like AI is such a hype, everybody's talking about it, we are talking about it here. So what happened?
Yeah, so AI was actually coined as a term in 1956. So you think that it's a modern idea, but it's actually a very old idea. And it was coined by a group of professors within the US when they were at a summer gathering at Dartmouth University. And it was specifically chosen as a name for a new field that they wanted to create based on a term. They wanted to find a term that would help them attract public attention and funding. So originally they came up with the name automata studies, and that did not attract any attention or funding. So they came up with the name artificial intelligence because it sounded sexier, it sounded much more exciting, it sounds inherently good because intelligence sounds like a good thing that we want in the world. And so that became a kind of a guiding ideology for what we see with AI development today. There's sort of this inherent drive within the field, within the tech industry, within the big tech companies in the US to try and create some kind of technology that will ultimately do anything that humans can do. There's a lot of scientific debate about whether that is ever going to be possible. But what's happened in the last few years, the reason why AI is on everyone's lips now is because it has become a very commercially successful technology. So the big companies, Google, OpenAI, Microsoft, Facebook, Apple, they have realized that AI is something that they can use to create a lot of profit for their companies. They can create exciting products that users are going to use. And so they've put their entire marketing engine behind trying to make this technology the most exciting representation of the future possible. And AI is very powerful. It can do many things. But I like to always talk about the history and the fact that it was coined as a marketing term because to this day, a lot of the conceptions of what artificial intelligence is actually still rooted in significant amounts of marketing that somehow these technologies are meant to be intelligent. And so interestingly, when we see the fact that ChatGPT was kind of the thing that broke AI into the public discourse, to me is not surprising at all because chatbots have been around since the 1950s as a really powerful and potent way to demonstrate the technology and to make it seem more powerful, more exciting, more human-like than the technology actually is. So in the 1960s, there was a chatbot named Eliza that looked almost exactly like ChatGPT. And at that time, when Eliza came out, the AI field was not as big, there wasn't as much public attention, there wasn't as much media attention, but within the people and communities that were paying attention, they thought AI had been solved back then in the 1960s when they saw Eliza. And we're seeing the same exact discourse happening now with ChatGPT because chatbots, again, are just such a potent demo. They're so sexy. It seems like there's something more behind the way that chatbots talk. And humans forever, for millennia, have this natural inclination to associate, anthropomorphize inanimate objects. So this same thing is happening again. Like ChatGPT broke open the discourse because it kind of taps into that deep sense that humans have, that like everything is sort of like us and there's intelligence everywhere. And that's basically why there's so much hype now, is because all of the companies know that the more hype there is, the more money they make.
And what is the role of OpenAI in this industry right now? Because Karen is currently writing a book about OpenAI. And as tech journalists, we know how hard it is to get like inside information of these companies. And OpenAI is like the most mysterious and accountable tech company I know. And Karen chose them to write a book. So I wanted to talk about a little bit about the book and what have you discovered so far?
So I feel like I didn't choose the book chose me. And the reason is because, so I've been covering AI for 6 years now. And when I first started, OpenAI was 2 years old. So it's an 8-year-old company. It was 2 years old then. And no one knew about the company. But because I was covering AI day in and day out, I noticed that there was this new company that seemed to be doing some interesting things, and most importantly, seemed to be influencing a lot of AI development, even though the public and consumers had no idea what this company was. And so in 2019, I ended up profiling OpenAI, and I was the first journalist to ever profile OpenAI right as it was beginning to emerge kind of into a bigger conversation. At the time, it was GPT-2. Now they're on GPT-4, so this was 2 generations ago. And I honestly was a little bit surprised when OpenAI became so important, because there were already so many other dominant players in AI development, like Google and Facebook, and OpenAI was, it was actually considered the laughingstock of the tech industry when it started. And part of the reason was because they had this very specific ideology that now is pervasive and has become the norm, but their ideology was, we want to use an enormous amount of data, insanely large computers, to try and recreate human intelligence. And at the time, this was not the norm at all. Like within AI research, it was, people were more focused on trying to develop more efficient AI methods that wouldn't use so much data and so much computers. But OpenAI was co-founded by Elon Musk and was given a commitment of $1 billion when they first started. And so with all of that money that they were swimming in, they were like, why don't we just go big or go home? Let's spend all of our money on acquiring the biggest computers and amassing the most amount of data to train an AI technology. And so the reason why I ended up choosing to write about OpenAI for my book is because this company has completely transformed the way that AI is developed today. Before, as I mentioned, AI has many technologies, it has many flavors. Before, there were rule-based methods that didn't even use data. There were small data models, there were small computer models, and we have now moved to an era where the amount of data and the size of the computers that are being used to train AI is actually starting to threaten the amount of resources that we have on the planet. So if you've ever seen news stories talking about how AI has a huge energy problem, this is OpenAI's ideology and the sort of like infection of OpenAI's ideology across the tech industry. There was a information story that came out maybe a couple months ago, The Information, that scooped that Microsoft and OpenAI are currently planning on developing a $100 billion supercomputer to train a single AI model for OpenAI in the future. And data centers, if you've never seen a photo of them, they're these absolutely massive warehouses that kind of sit in various places in the world and consume enormous amounts of energy. The warehouses are filled with racks and racks of computers, extremely powerful computers, and they're really loud. They're like, the computers are whirring and humming, and there's like crackling noises because of the sheer amount of energy that is being delivered to these data centers. And today, the largest data centers, which are only developed by the top 5 US giants, they cost about $1 billion or $2 billion to develop. So Microsoft and OpenAI are planning to develop a $100 billion supercomputer that is predicted to consume as much energy as 4 million American homes to train a single AI model. And my book basically is trying to illuminate the fact that there is now so much hype and so much marketing around this particular vision of AI development that consumes extraordinary amounts of resources. And the public has become, there's basically no information anymore. It's very hard to find information now in the public about alternatives for AI that are not this kind of extremely consumptive technology. And actually, when we talk about benefits of AI, like AI in education, AI in healthcare, AI for tackling climate change, they're actually talking about a fundamentally different type of AI technology than something like ChatGPT. And because of the marketing engine from these tech companies, there's now an association with enormous data centers, enormous amounts of data, and this future vision that somehow we're going to cure cancer with these technologies. They're actually talking about a totally different AI technology that does not use these levels of resources. And so I hope that with my book, I can kind of illuminate the kind of conceit that these companies have engaged in, and hopefully shift the public discourse and the resources towards smaller, much more efficient AI technologies that actually are really beneficial and the ones that we want, and away from the AI technologies that only serve to make these companies a lot of profit.
I've been thinking OpenAI is like a successful example of a PR strategy, and is a perfect example of how like the media create the buzz around the magic of technology. And it makes me think about our role as journalists in disseminating like disseminating and often exaggerating the effects of AI. So, what are our responsibilities as journalists when reporting on AI? Like, what are the mistakes that we can't make? And what questions do we have to make when like reporting on a new medical technology?
So first of all, if anyone feels intimidated about writing about AI, I absolutely encourage you to not, because I think it is everyone's responsibility. All journalists can write about AI and should write about AI, because AI is going to touch everything. If you're writing about the healthcare industry, if you're writing about politics, if you're writing about education, environment, whatever it is, AI is going to come for your beat. And it's a really exciting time as a journalist to cover AI, because it is such an important story. And I don't at all think that there's any kind of specialized knowledge that is needed to cover AI, because ultimately the story of AI has always, I think, is sort of has always been about ideology, money, and power, and these are so fundamental and core to what journalists have been doing forever. And so I invite all of you to jump in and cover it. And if you want help getting started, the Pulitzer Center has been running a series called the AI Spotlight Series, where we've been training journalists on sort of the basics of the terminology, the history. Some of the things that I'm talking about today are things that we go over. And it's completely free online courses that we teach. But basically, like what I always say in the course is that when we as journalists cover AI, we should recognize that this is a story about people. It's not a story about technology, it's a story about people, because people develop AI and people are affected by AI. And ultimately, the way to understand whether or not this technology as it exists today is helping us and helping us progress, or harming us and making us regress, is based on how it actually affects people in the real world. And these are stories that we have known how to tell forever. And I think sometimes there ends up being kind of like an idea of AI as magic or impenetrable or difficult to understand, because we don't end up as journalists telling these human stories that illuminate exactly what this technology is about and how it's affecting us. And the other thing I strongly emphasize is that, as I mentioned, artificial intelligence was coined as a marketing term. The association of this technology with human intelligence, this is a marketing trick. And so we should not be, as journalists, perpetuating this marketing, this PR, and we should resist anthropomorphizing this technology by using metaphors like this is a very human-like or technology, or that we are soon going to recreate a new form of intelligence in computers. Like this, I don't think that is helpful at all to our readers. It's a really big disservice to public understanding, for really understanding what AI is, what AI can and can't do. And again, like the best way I think to actually show what AI can and can't do is to actually tell stories about the people that are using it, the people that are affected by it, where it falls apart, who gets harmed, who profits in the process, those kinds of stories.
What about the AI tools for journalists? Like, we know that there is a growing demand for training and the use of AI tools and technologies in journalism. And indeed, that there are actually like very useful technologies. I use it sometimes. I wanted to know and discuss now what precautions we journalists should take when using these tools. And I wanted to know if it is possible to have like a critical use of them. How?
Yeah, so I think I also use AI in my work. I don't use ChatGPT. I don't use generative AI. But for example, while I was writing my book, I was like trying to figure out I wanted to paint a scene of OpenAI's office and sort of the wealth that this company represents. And there was some photos that I had taken when I was there of the chairs and the furniture, and then some photos that other photojournalists had taken of the chairs that they had upgraded their chairs like 4 years later after significant amounts of new funding and hype and investment. And I really wanted to know how much the chairs cost so that I could illustrate the kind of progress that this company has had. And so I did a reverse image search on Google to find the chair, which is AI. And the chair was like $20,000, 20,000 US dollars for their new fancy chairs in the office. And so I think AI can be an incredibly useful tool, but there are definitely traps for how to use this technology. And the framework that I like to use is, first of all, it's important to recognize that AI is not an accurate tool. AI today is based on statistical methods of computation. So it is always approximating data to create a model that can then generate some kind of answer for you. And sometimes it can be a very sophisticated approximator, and it can approximate answers for you that are oftentimes correct, but it doesn't mean that it's 100% accurate. And so as journalists, we should be thinking about, when we're using AI, are we tackling is the task that we're trying to do, does it require low accuracy or does it require high accuracy? And is it internal facing, like we're just doing some research, trying to automate some of our processes, or are we trying to deliver a public facing product to our audience? And if your task is low accuracy and it's research for yourself, that's a great use of AI. But if it is high accuracy and you're planning on delivering the answer from that AI model to the audience, this is an absolute danger zone. And so, for example, I do not at all think that we should be using AI to generate articles. If you wanted to assist in some levels of, summarization or something like that, you will need to have a very, very rigorous fact-checking process afterwards to make sure that whatever the AI model spit out is accurate. And I think the other thing to kind of add to this conversation is, because the latest AI tools are now only developed by the largest US companies in the world, oftentimes those companies are now the ones that are training us on how to use those tools. And those trainings are important and they can be helpful. And we as journalists need to recognize that it is also a form of marketing. And you need to take these trainings with a grain of salt and also come to your own conclusions from your own testing, your own experimentation with these tools about when you should and shouldn't use it. And do not rely on these companies to tell you when you should and shouldn't use it, because they will always try to make their tools sound much more capable than they actually are. We've seen, it's not new in this phenomenon within AI. Like the tech industry has always sort of used journalist trainings as kind of a soft power for influencing public opinion. Like LinkedIn has that program for LinkedIn for journalists, where that's their soft power tool for influencing journalists. I use LinkedIn for journalists all the time, and also recognize that I need to be really critical about when I'm engaging in the training with LinkedIn, to take everything that they say with a grain of salt and come to my own conclusions about how to use LinkedIn. And so, yeah, and you had mentioned to me at one point that there's this amazing Brazilian researcher that did research.
He's not Brazilian, he's Greek.
He's Greek.
Yeah.
An amazing Greek researcher that had done an analysis of when companies start to launch journalism training programs, when tech companies start to launch journalism training programs. It so happens that it always coincides with they enter a new country when that country is discussing tech regulation. So I think this is just an example of we should be engaged, we should be training ourselves, upskilling ourselves on how to use these tools and using the resources out there that maybe tech companies are providing, but also recognize that you should be doing it with a very, very critical lens.
I think it's the perfect moment to discuss your project called AI colonialism. And you claim that artificial intelligence is creating a new colonial order. I would like to just explain that. What exactly are we talking about, and how this new colonial system operates?
Yeah, so I don't think I have to tell this audience that, like, historical colonialism was based on this ideology that the empires of the global north deserved and had the right to go to the global south and extract resources for their own profit and enrichment. And through that process ended up significantly kind of undermining the economic progress of global south countries. The AI industry as it stands now, where it is chasing this vision of AI technologies that consume enormous amounts of data and use enormous amounts of energy to power their data centers, is the same exact ideology. It is global north companies that act like empires and are going all around the world to take people's data, to take people's art, to take people's writing, to take journalists' writing, and to use their natural resources as well, because data centers actually don't just require energy, they also require significant amounts of water to cool the computers so that they don't overheat. They go to global south countries where oftentimes regulation is not as strong as maybe like Europe, for example, to then extract that data, extract those resources for the global north company's benefit and profit. And so, and again, like, this is for this very specific narrow vision of AI that we have now, where ChatGPT, other forms of generative AI have been built on the ideology of consume, 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 consume. And so over the last few years, I've reported in a lot of different countries in the global south of how this impacts communities. Like during historical colonialism, a huge problem was labor exploitation, because an economic engine needs a lot of labor, and so the empires would go to other places to exploit other countries' labor, and get other countries' labor forces to kind of suffer the physical or psychological abuses that were required to create economic progress for an empire. Last year, I went to Kenya and interviewed a bunch of workers in Kenya that were contracted by OpenAI to perform content moderation that would ultimately help ChatGPT be safer. They were left with significant post-traumatic stress disorder in the same way that Facebook content moderators has sort of been ruined in their lives and their mental health, for something that they will never benefit from. Like, they do not use ChatGPT in their life. They do not use generative AI in their life. Kenya doesn't have the resources to create this kind of generative AI model to kind of compete with the US. They don't even have data centers in that country to compete with the size of the data centers that are now required for AI development. So it's such a perfect parallel to the way that colonial empires operated in the past. And I hope that we will sort of see a similar transition where over time, many groups, many communities rose up and resisted empires, and empires fell, and we moved to more inclusive forms of governance. And I really hope that we can make this transition with the AI industry as well, where we actually have more inclusive forms of AI development, where everyone gets to participate in talking about how they want to shape the future of AI, rather than just having these 5 tech giants in the US in their wealthy Silicon Valley enclaves kind of dictating to the rest of the world how it should be.
Can you tell us about your reporting on Chile, because you have been there recently and you have some funny stories, I know, about it, but you discover like how Chileans are actually fighting against a big tech, which is hard for us here in Latin America. So
yeah, so just before Gabo, I was in Chile and in Uruguay to do some reporting on some incredible activism that is happening in both countries right now against Google and Microsoft and the data centers that those companies are trying to drop into Chile and in Uruguay. And the issue that was happening was as both countries were facing drought, and in Uruguay's case, the drought was so severe that salt water was being directed into the pipes because there was no more fresh water left. The government simultaneously also approved a Google data center and a Microsoft data center project that was going to use fresh water to cool the data centers. And the fresh water is required for cooling the data centers if the data centers need water for cooling. There's other data center designs that actually don't need water for cooling. They use air conditioning or wind, basically, to cool the computers. But companies prefer to use water because it is technically more energy efficient and it costs them less money. So in the middle of this drought, where people in Uruguay were drinking salty water in their taps, they learned that their government had approved a data center to use the fresh water that they are not receiving. And in both Chile and in Uruguay, there were intense activism movements to protect their freshwater resources. And it was amazing to interview these activists because they are not technology activists, they're environmental activists, they are water activists that have been activated many times throughout the years with different industries coming to the country to take the water resources. And what was amazing also was, first, Google came to Santiago and we're like, we're going to bring a data center to Santiago. And they received so much resistance from the community in Santiago that they actually said to the activists, when I was interviewing the activists, she said, they actually said to us during negotiations, you know what, if you don't want this data center, we'll just go somewhere else in Latin America. So then they showed up in Uruguay, and then they faced so much resistance in Uruguay that they still couldn't get their data center successfully approved, that they went back to Santiago. And it was amazing speaking with the activist in Montevideo who was saying, this is what we need to counteract the power of these companies. We need global solidarity networks where these companies cannot just play a game where they come to your country and dangle a kind of like the future in front of you and dangle all these ideas of modernity in front of you, and then pit you against another country to compete for the same project. So in this case, it was a beautiful kind of story of how these activists, they actually didn't even know each other, but they were learning from each other. Like the activist in Montevideo had read stories about what the activists had done in Santiago and then learned their playbook to resist. And so basically the conclusion of where things stand now is that both Google and Microsoft, they do still have data center projects pending, but they're now negotiating with the government to not use fresh water, to switch their design for their data center to just use electricity and to use air conditioning for cooling. And it's an amazing positive story of how things like this can happen.
I think this story shows very clearly why we need Latin American journalists covering AI, because it's not just covering AI or tech. It's also covering environment. It's also covering human rights violations. It's also covering like people. I've been reporting about the Brazilian data workers, and I've discovered like people are dealing with like extreme violent content on Facebook and Instagram, and they receive like 7 cents of dollars now for each post moderated. So it's a very, very hard job, and there's a huge industry exploitation in Brazil, and also in a lot of other Latin American countries, and also in Africa, also in South Asia. So I think it's amazing that Karen comes to Chile and Uruguay to report, but we also need a lot of journalists willing to report on these issues here, based here, knowing like our local context. In Brazil, for example, big tech companies are lobbying really, really, really hard against the AI regulation. Last year, they were able to kill a platform regulation bill, and now they're doing the same, like a very, very dirty lobbying inside Congress against the new AI bill, which is trying to like regulate them. And for me, it's like a question of sovereignty, and also a question of, as Karen said, colonialism and extractivism, and how we as journalists can fight against this power, because this is like a huge power. We really need to fight against it.
Absolutely.
So my last question will be like about this power, especially in our journalism industry. There is a growing issue about the use of journalist content to train AI. And I would like you to talk a little bit about these agreements, like Reuters and Financial Times already
And the Atlantic.
And Atlantic already signed agreements with AI companies. What do you think about it? And how can we fight against this imbalance of power between the journalism industry and the tech industry?
Yeah, these agreements really worry me because I think on one hand, if the companies are going to train on our data, we should be paid for it. And they haven't, until these partnerships arose this past year, like ChatGPT was made completely for free in terms of the data that was gathered. Like they didn't pay anyone for that data. At the same time, I think the way that these partnerships are being designed, where they are now offering payment and making it seem like they're listening to our concerns, I worry that it is repeating what has happened in the past, where Facebook and Google also said, we're going to partner with you to distribute your articles in special programs, and we're going to bring you a ton of traffic. And then so many publications became dependent on that distribution channel. And then when Google or Facebook started changing their algorithms, started changing different types of things that journalists had no control over, it decimated entire newsrooms and closed entire publications that had built their whole audience on these partnerships. And I really, really worry that now we're entering kind of a new phase of that, where we're going into these partnerships, we're getting paid, honestly, oftentimes not that much money for significant amounts of content that is based on all of our blood, sweat, and tears and significant work. And we're like, the media industry right now is not in a good financial position, and there are many newsrooms, I'm sure, that are going to become dependent on those kinds of payouts. And then what are they going to do when those companies start paying less and less and less and less and less, or decide to change the way that they that the partnerships work with extremely restrictive terms? Like, these companies have huge monopoly power, so it is inevitable that they're going to play these games with the industry. So I hope that our industry can kind of see that trap and kind of hold out against just entering these partnerships thinking that it is the thing to do. And I hope that we as an industry can come together to propose alternatives, because right now it's basically the tech industry that's coming to us and being like, hey, what do you think about this partnership? It looks so great. And we're not really coming to the table with our own ideas of what we would want it to look like that would be good for our industry. And yeah, I hope that we can kind of collectively discuss together to come up with those ideas for how these partnerships could actually be beneficial for us.
Ok, tenemos 18 minutos ahora, podemos abrir para algunas preguntas, porque tenemos que acabar a las 8:10. So, ¿hay preguntas?
Si alguien tiene pregunta, por favor, levante la mano para acercar el micrófono. Por acá hay una. Y eso, gracias por
Gracias.
Gracias. Hola. ¿Tengo que decir en español o en inglés? Español. Ok. Hola, me llamo Augusta, soy brasileña. Soy periodista freelancer en Brasil. Mi pregunta es, como dijiste tú, y nosotros todos utilizamos inteligencia artificial y estas empresas ya tienen un poder muy grande y una influencia muy grande en la política y un poder económico muy grande. ¿Tú crees que hay un way back? No sé cómo decir eso en español, pero si hay un retorno, ¿qué podemos nosotros, periodistas, pero también ciudadanos, qué podemos hacer para, no sé, evitar este tipo de monopolio?
That's a great question. First of all, everyone should start covering AI and investigating these companies and educating the public about the nature of these companies and the technology. Because I don't actually think it's inevitable for us to continue down the path that we are today, where the companies are so powerful and we have like very little bargaining power with them. I think the activists in Chile and Uruguay and many other activists around the world that I've met with, who have created kind of labor unions, who have done collective action to resist these companies, kind of demonstrate to us that it is possible to change things when negotiating with these companies about what kind of relationship we want to have with them. And in your own practice, if you're using AI, like, also vote with your feet. If you find that one company is providing AI technologies in a more ethical manner, or engaging with journalists in a more ethical manner, use those AI tools instead of another company's AI tools that maybe is not. And so I think those kind of three things, like writing and covering and investigating and illuminating what's happening, actually like coming together collectively as an industry to bargain more successfully with these companies, and then also just being cautious with your own use.
Acá. ¿Dónde?
Por acá arriba.
Aquí. Acá. ¿No?
Aquí.
Ah, ok.
De lejos. Yo tengo una pregunta sobre la distorsión en la información que las inteligencias artificiales están recibiendo. Es muy distinto recibir información en inglés, producida en inglés, por el norte global, por ejemplo, que tiene una mirada muy distinta del mundo, a recibir información latinoamericana en español, a recibir información en árabe o incluso es información que tiene una polaridad distinta en otras regiones del mundo. Y la pregunta va más hacia el periodismo sobre la inteligencia artificial. ¿Debería ser el periodismo, los periodistas, un fact-checker, alguien que esté revisando también, ya que tiene que lidiar con los bulos y con las fake news? ¿También debería ser el periodista quien está encargado de desmitificar la inteligencia artificial? ¿O debería ser el activismo o el público en general?
I absolutely think that for us as journalists, like we need to be holding these companies accountable, the way that we hold politicians accountable, the way that we've always held people in power accountable, by fact-checking their statements. Yes, I do think that that is a role that we should take, and we should each be developing our own understanding of AI by talking, for example, by interviewing experts that are not necessarily being paid by these companies. Like there are lots of academic researchers that are independent that can provide more nuanced perspectives on these technologies. And when we decide to write about the tools and choose who to interview, we should be really cautious about interviewing people that don't have their entire salary wrapped up in profit motives for boosting this technology. And I also think, again, it's like telling the stories about humans, especially like Tatiana said, like there's so many stories in Latin America to be told about the way that AI is affecting people and affecting communities, both positive and negative. And my dream is for everyone to be writing these stories so that ultimately the public hears all of these different perspectives and not just one perspective from a company. Like that's our job, is to elevate the other perspectives that the public is not hearing about right now from these companies, so that ultimately they can make informed decisions from hearing what the companies have to say and what people who are actually being affected have to say about this technology.
Al principio mencionabas que algunas personas todavía se pueden sentir intimidadas por la inteligencia artificial, pero desde tu perspectiva como periodista o como escritora, ¿qué casos de usos específicos sientes que podrían hacer sentir a las personas empoderadas o sacarle provecho a la inteligencia artificial?
When you say what specific cases, you mean like what specific stories?
Bueno, tú mencionabas que no necesariamente inteligencia artificial generativa, sino que también existen chatbots y otros tipos de implementaciones o sabores. Entonces eso, como que qué casos de uso podrían utilizar para sacarle provecho y no pensar que de pronto les van a robar el trabajo.
Yeah, so I think if I understand your question, it's sort of like, what are other forms of AI technologies out there that we should be looking for and covering as journalists, so that people understand alternatives? So there's some like really exciting work that's happening in AI in healthcare, for example, to train models for detecting cancer in an MRI scan. These models have nothing to do with ChatGPT. They're like really small, efficient models Usually what the research has sort of shown that the most effective use or application of these models is in conjunction with a doctor who actually has been trained, has a medical degree, has engaged with patients, has a relationship with the patient, and they can together diagnose a patient more effectively with an AI tool. There's also like really exciting uses of AI in fighting climate change that also have nothing to do with ChatGPT. They're small models that help optimize the energy consumption of a building, for example, or for helping integrate more renewable energy into power grids. One of the things that we need to do, of course, as a world is transition to more renewable energy, but it's really, really complicated for utility companies to do that because renewable energy sources only generate some of the time. They only generate when the sun is out or the wind is blowing. And it's really complicated for a company to orchestrate all of the energy demands, all of the energy generation in an efficient way that utilizes the resources optimally. And that's actually a great job for AI to do. So I would encourage people to look for, basically like as you start noticing AI in the world around you, just ask questions to different people about, oh, tell me how this particular type of AI works. And like, how is it being used? What are the pros? And then interview academics as well about what are the cons? Are there any concerns that you should be aware of? And I think over time, you'll discover that there's many types of like AI that exist in the world, some of which are really positive and that have nothing to do with kind of like the generative AI of today.
Podemos tener solo más una pregunta, porque tenemos que acabar. Ele estaba hace tiempo.
Hola, gracias. Yo percibo un rechazo por parte del público hacia los productos de la inteligencia artificial generativa, sobre todo en imágenes. Pero si hablas con profesores universitarios de high school, te dicen que han cambiado sus métodos de evaluación para evitar que sus alumnos utilicen ChatGPT, por ejemplo. Y mencionabas que si hay editoriales que utilizan herramientas como ChatGPT, deberían implementar un fact-checking muy riguroso para poder sacar este material. ¿Tú visualizas alguna posibilidad a futuro de que estos modelos de negocios fallen porque el público o la audiencia rechace o deje de consumir contenido generado con inteligencia artificial?
I do think that we are kind of as the media industry right now, we're in a little bit of a fragile position where there's a trust crisis in the media, and if we do not use these tools cautiously, we're going to just exacerbate that trust problem. Readers are going to stop trusting what they see, what they read from publications, and they already have lost trust in what they see and read just on social media, and we're sort of like the last stronghold of the truth in this kind of AI deepfake era. And so I think it is really, really important to be cautious about how you use AI, especially when it's generative AI. And then when you do use it, of course, engage in rigorous fact checking, but also disclose to your audience exactly how you are using AI, why you used it, and what the limitations might be, to be as transparent as possible with your audience so that they don't start to doubt the accuracy or the factuality or the realness of your reporting. And if we don't do that well, I do think that it will really undermine our credibility as journalists.
We are already facing a trust crisis. We don't need another issue to this. So, Karen, thank you so much. We really need to end this conversation. Muchas gracias para todos. Estoy muy feliz de estar acá. Y é isto. Buenas noches.
Muchísimas gracias.